Should the Detroit Lions be Super Bowl favorites? I know, that seems like a crazy question when talking about this franchise. After all, this is the same team that drafts Hall of Fame players, runs them into the ground, forces them to retire, or just straight up loses every single game in the year. The Detroit Lions have had a dysfunctional history. They have not been to a Super Bowl, never won one, and even the most minor of victories are far fleeting. Their last division title, 1993. Their last playoff win in 1991. And you gotta go back when Bobby Lane was playing for the playoff win before that. Detroit, even with Matthew Stafford, a fourth quarter comeback machine. Their prize for going 0-16, the number one overall draft pick, not even he could save them from their legacy. And it left Detroit Lions fans in a really, really rough spot. It felt like deja vu. They were about to see another great player get run into the ground without winning anything. But that all changed. You noticed right now this season that the Detroit Lions have been a lot better than people have expected. And to understand where they're going, we need to talk a little bit about how they got here. And it's because of these two, Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell. These two guys were brought in 2020 after the Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia era. And you probably know Dan Campbell best from his press conference of biting kneecaps. We're going to go rah, 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 tear each other, tear apart the enemy, just keep getting up, yada, yada, yada. The media freaked out about that stuff. They couldn't believe that Dan Campbell was talking like a barbarian, so to speak. But anyone who was a Detroit Lions fan or knew someone who was a Detroit Lions fan knew what he was telling them. That this team is not going to be the same old Lions. It's going to be something different, something new. And that we, the Lions, are never going to back down from a challenge. And the very first thing that this new regime did was decide to go in a different direction. Most teams draft a quarterback. Most teams try to build it that way. But Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes decided to take this rebuild in the trenches. They traded away Matthew Stafford. They got a haul. They got some great draft capital, and they got a different quarterback. Now, at the time, there were a lot of questions about whether Jared Goff would be a placeholder, but that didn't matter. What did matter was that the Lions were going to do this right, drafting Penei Sewell with their number one overall pick that year. Matthew Stafford ended up getting a Super Bowl the moment he was traded out of Detroit, which a lot of Lions fans were happy for, even if they were sad to see their favorite player go. And the Lions, in the meantime, their team, they had a lot of growing to do. One of the most interesting things about that season, even though they lost in heartbreaking fashion, you saw a little bit of sparks. They were aggressive. They faked punts. They were onside kicking against the Los Angeles Rams. They were not afraid to get creative and throw the kitchen sink at their opponent, even if they didn't have enough talent to actually land a killing blow. And the growth of this team was really present during Hard Knocks. Hard Knocks just demonstrate exactly what the Lions want to be. They want to be a tough team. They want to be a team that never backs down. And, the speeches are like the one ass cheek or three toes. If you don't know, look that up. Dan Campbell had some really funny speeches, and you could see it. Players were crying. Players were emotional. Everyone was bought in to this vision of what Dan Campbell, what Brad Holmes, what they were building. They started rough. They started last year rough at 1-6. But that was because even though they had an elite offense, their defense, they actually had the youngest roster in the league last year. But they rebounded. They went 9-8. And they went 5-1 in the division in the process. And yeah, they might have missed the playoffs, but they got to send Aaron Rodgers leaving Lambeau Field for the final time, with his last play being an interception. Detroit was entering the offseason with a ton of momentum. But there are a lot of people in the media saying, oh, but they're the Lions. They stink. They're the Lions. They suck. Dan Campbell and the team didn't let that faze them. They were given a tough opening assignment. Week 1 against the Kansas City Chiefs. And guess what? They thrived in the opening start of the season. They beat Kansas City. They beat the Green Bay Packers in Lambeau Field. And each contender that was thrown their way, other than the Baltimore Ravens, they competed and gave them a real scare, which I was actually right that at the trade deadline, they would be 6-2. Very, very fun fact. Just flip a few of these games. I know, got to pat myself on the back a little bit. I was very right about this team and some stuff, but the Detroit Lions were starting to unravel. They lost to the Green Bay Packers. They lost to the Chicago Bears. And mainly because their defense, which improved last year after some acquisitions this offseason, including C.J. Gardner-Johnson, Cam Sutton, among others. There are a lot of people starting to talk, is this team dead? Is this team over? Did they peak too soon? Are the Detroit Lions a bunch of frauds? And well, you got our answer. I actually predicted, and back in August on the Lions part, and more recently for the Broncos part, that the Broncos would be 7-6 against a 9-4 Detroit Lions team, which is so crazy how I predicted that one. But who cares about that? What's more important is that the Detroit Lions destroyed them. They destroyed the Denver Broncos. Their defense played well. Their offense was cooking. And my prediction that Super Bowl 58 would be between the Buffalo Bills and Detroit Lions, with the Lions winning the Super Bowl, looks more achievable than ever. And what I have seen this season has made me so much more confident that the Lions are going to finally, for the first time in their history, get to and win the Super Bowl. Don't believe me? Well, let's talk about it. There are a few reasons why the Lions should be Super Bowl favorites this year. First and foremost, they got a high-powered offensive line. The offensive line is the most important position on the field, and there's a reason why. First off, you probably heard a lot of the stuff about, Jared Goff needs a clean pocket to throw the ball, and that is true. But guess what? Every quarterback does. That's why Patrick Mahomes lost his Super Bowl against Tom Brady. The offensive line stunk. That's why Joe Burrow did not win a Super Bowl against the Los Angeles Rams. His offensive line stunk. And guess what? Great offensive lines travel very, very well, especially on the road. If you can be able to lean on a consistent run game in the event that you're having trouble, with the road environment, that's huge. You saw that against Kansas City. And just like that game against the Denver Broncos, they just got all their starting offensive linemen back. The Lions have been dealing with a rampant set of offensive line injuries, including Frank Ragnow and a bunch of others. But they finally have it all coming together at the right time this season. And if the Lions can enter in with a good offensive line and completely secure, keep Jared Goff healthy, out of harm's way, they're going to have a great time. Because they got weapons, and this offensive line, where it goes, this team will go. And from what I can tell, this offensive line is one of the best in the league, if not the best in the entire league. The other thing that makes these Lions contenders, they're young and twitchy. You gotta have young, fast players to be able to win championships. Just ask the Kansas City Chiefs defense last year. They were young, and they got after it. And the Lions draft classes, we can talk about Amon-Ra St. Brown and Penei Sewell all day long, and they were great. But even their first and second year guys are stepping up and making big contributions. Jameson Williams is a legit downfield threat at the wide receiver position. Aiden Hutchinson has been their bright spot on the defensive side of the ball. And this year, I loved their draft pick this year before the season, and gosh darn it, Brad Holmes did a phenomenal job this year. Jahmyr Gibbs has been a phenomenal running back. He has completely developed into this speedy option to replace DeAndre Swift. I love this pick because DeAndre Swift was a player that kept getting injured for the Lions, and just if your best asset is availability, and Jahmyr Gibbs is available. He's a great speedy wide receiver. He can catch out of the backfield. Jack Campbell has been great to reinforce that linebacking room. And Brian Branch and Sam Laporta have been the steals of this draft. Sam Laporta and Jahmyr Gibbs were both acquired from trading down from the Los Angeles Rams pick. And Sam Laporta has been putting up numbers that is Pro Bowl worthy. He's been a huge asset. Just alone in that Denver Broncos game, he scored 3 touchdowns. And Brian Branch has been a ball hawk. He's been everywhere, and including he had the very first pick six of the entire year against the Kansas City Chiefs. All these guys have been stepping up to make these incredible contributions, and almost all of Brad Holmes' draft picks are still on the team, meaning they have been using their lower draft capital and their higher draft capital to build a great team overall, which is huge. And if you're young, well, you're going to be just a little bit faster, just a little bit more naive, that you don't quite, the game doesn't feel quite as big. It's just another great thing for this Lions team. They're not old, they're young, they're feisty, they're ready to roll. And the other thing is that they're fearless. And this is all sends back to the Dan Campbell mindset. The Lions, I've been on this way back early in the season. The Lions are 4-0 in their primetime games, but 6-1 in games outside of their 1 o'clock Eastern time window. Those games would include that noon Thanksgiving loss to the Packers, and the wins against the Chargers and the Buccaneers in the 425 slot. This team, when the lights get bright, they like to shine. It's been an ongoing gag in Detroit that they are always banished to the 1 o'clock time so the refs can go screw them over. And that wasn't the case at all this year and the second half of last year. Dan Campbell's not afraid to call crazy fake punts, kick off sides, going for it on 4th down. His mindset of just going for the kill no matter what, it is completely set into this team. And they are playing every primetime game like it's their last. And that's huge, because like Kirk Cousins, not every team gets better when the lights are bright. Monday Night Football against with the Jaguars is a great example. They were on Monday Night Football 2 separate times recently. They lost against backup Jake Browning, and they lost against the Baltimore Ravens, including instances where Trevor Lawrence just kind of fumbled the ball out of nowhere. The Lions aren't that. The Lions thrive on that newfound attention and stardom. And you could see this last year going back to the Thanksgiving game against the Buffalo Bills, where they gave the team that would end up being the 2 seed in the AFC fits, even though they had 3 or 4 wins in the season up at that point in time. And that is absolutely a great thing, especially if you're going to go on the road and play playoff games, which Detroit probably will. And the final thing is that the rest of the NFC has issues. The rest of the NFC has a ton of issues that we need to talk about, because not everyone is. Everybody has been talking about how there's a 3-headed monster at the top of the NFC, and that is complete bogus. It is bogus. It's a complete lie. Let's talk about it. First and foremost, the Dallas Cowboys. Media darling to some, and some just spend all their time complaining about the Cowboys. Either way, you always hear about the Dallas Cowboys. The Dallas Cowboys have a phenomenal record at home, but the moment they get on the road, they stink. There's something missing with this team. There's something's not quite right. And spoiler alert, with the schedule for the Eagles and the Cowboys remaining, the Cowboys are going to have to play road playoff games, which they have not proven that they have been able to do. The Eagles? Well, the Eagles and the 49ers are widely considered by most pundits to be in this top class, because they think that Philadelphia Eagles are elite. Are they? Honest question, are they actually an elite team? I don't think so. I've watched a lot of these Eagles games, and it's just a tale of the Eagles playing down their competition, letting them hang around, and refusing to just slam on the gas. Yeah, they had an impressive comeback against the Kansas City Chiefs on Monday Night Football, but Washington, the Rams, the Commanders, the Vikings, they would have lost to the Patriots if Mac Jones didn't throw a pick 6 early in the game. The Eagles have a lot of problems. They've been struggling to find identity all year, and yet everyone thinks that they're going to flip the switch. They're going to be the ones to just turn on the Jets of the postseason. Remember, the road to the postseason for the Eagles, the road to the Super Bowl, was incredibly easy. They got to play a fraudulent New York Giants team, and they got to play the San Francisco 49ers, who one drive into the game lost their starting quarterback, who was their third string quarterback, so they had to go to a fourth string quarterback. The Eagles are not what everyone thinks they are. And even though it's very likely they're going to at least get the 2 seed or the 1 seed, depending on how the rest of things go with San Francisco, it is baffling to me why the Eagles are put in such a separate tier. It took a miracle for them to survive the Buffalo Bills, and then when they face some actual contenders for the 49ers at home and the Cowboys on the road, they got clobbered. They got boat raced. And yet we're supposed to take them seriously as a Super Bowl favorites from the NFC. I don't think so. In San Francisco is a very popular pick. They got Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel. They got all these great players. But I've seen this movie before, where they have all the pieces in place, and then they go lose in the NFC Championship game again and again. San Francisco is not it's not, how do I put this? San Francisco is a team that has a ceiling. There are only so many times that you can turn a subpar quarterback into an elite one because of the positions around it and the scheme before you hit a ceiling. And we saw Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy Garoppolo got to the Super Bowl, got to an NFC Championship game. The moment he gets out of San Francisco, he stinks. Brock Purdy was literally the last pick of the draft. The one constant in those games where the San Francisco 49ers lost, it was when the opposing team was able to get pressure on Brock Purdy. If you get pressure on Brock Purdy, you can turn him into a pumpkin. That's why the Dallas Cowboys last year gave Brock Purdy fits. Because he's not a playmaker. He's not going to take you over the top. And so he's just the next incarnation in some ways to Jimmy Garoppolo. System quarterbacks who are not going to be able to drag the 49ers just despite themselves to the championship, to the promised land. The rest of the NFC also stink. The NFC South, they're not winning a Super Bowl. They're not even getting to the NFC Championship game. The Rams, it was fun. They already have their Super Bowl, but they got a bizarre blend of old guys and young guys. They're not going to go very far. Seahawks are about to lose on Monday Night Football, and even if they do win that game, they're running out of gas. And the rest of the division of the NFC North, they stink. They stink. They just stink. The Vikings are on a backup quarterback. Justin Fields is doing okay, but the Bears dug themselves in a real hole with that 0-4 start. And the Packers, Jordan Love's just been up and down, and then Joe Barry's defense is not exactly great. The final point why the Lions should be Super Bowl favorites is that the AFC has completely cannibalized itself. Let's talk about it real quick. The Baltimore Ravens, Miami Dolphins, Kansas City Chiefs, Jacksonville Jaguars, these are your division leaders. And there's a lot of problems with each of those. Baltimore is obviously the one that everyone would have. They're everyone's favorite. And why wouldn't they? They got the dynamic quarterback. The scheme change is working. They're going to be the number 1 overall seed. The road to the Super Bowl is going to be through Baltimore. Why can't Baltimore win this year? Well, Baltimore, it's been a little bit of a storyline, but Lamar has only won 1 playoff game. His postseason success has been incredibly limited. And I'm waiting for the shoe to drop. I'm an AFC North fan. I've watched so much football with Lamar Jackson. I know I know how it's gonna end. It's gonna end the same way it did every year. And the Miami Dolphins, they've just. I literally threw in the thing from last week just to make a point. This team, they don't beat winning teams. They don't. Miami Dolphins are frauds. Kansas City, the wide receivers can't catch the football or line up offsides. And they have literally driven Patrick Mahomes into a meltdown that cost him and his coach money. The Kansas City Chiefs, I figured they'd take a step back, just like Golden State did. There are a lot of similarities between Golden State and um, Kansas City Chiefs. If you want to take a look at my YouTube short about that, really interesting to think about. But Kansas City, does anyone trust their wide receivers to come through for them? You can't just have Travis Kelce be your only reliable weapon and then rely on your defense to win the game. The New York Jets can't do it. You can't either. The Jacksonville Jaguars may not even win their own division. And of the rest of the contenders remaining, 4 of these teams have backup quarterbacks: Mitch Trubisky, Joe Flacco, Jake Browning, and Gardner Minshew. The Houston Texans have a rookie quarterback. The Denver Broncos, they can't stop yelling at each other. That's how much of a disaster it's been in Denver. And the Buffalo Bills, we have seen this movie before. We've seen this movie before where the Buffalo Bills are the media darling, they steamroll someone, and then they follow it up with losing to someone they had no business losing to. And even if Buffalo does run the table and get to the Super Bowl, just like I predicted back in August for my Super Bowl matchup, do you trust that the Buffalo Bills aren't just going to collapse at the end? They have dealt with a lot of pressure, including firing their offensive coordinator, all the news with Von Miller and his girlfriend. There's a whole lot of drama that's been in Buffalo. They've been able to keep the ship afloat, but I don't think it's going to last forever. So there you have it. The AFC completely collapsing and cannibalizing itself is just another reason why the Detroit Lions should be your favorite to win the Super Bowl. Are the Lions a perfect team? No. Their defense has had some issues, but I have a funny feeling that when C.J. Gardner-Johnson returns, when James Houston returns, you get some of those pieces back, that this defense is going to be just fine. Anyways, guys, if you like the video, if you want to support the channel, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. Do you think that the Detroit Lions can actually win the Super Bowl this year? Who's your pick? Let me know. Thank you for watching State of the North.